Hello, Darrell. Welcome to the Wax Museum.
Hi there. Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this is interesting because I really started this podcast like just having conversations that need to be had, and I would interact with someone online, and I would find, oh, this is a conversation we need to talk about, right? And then lately I've been contacted by authors, so I'd like read their stuff, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. We'll do a podcast on that, right? And you're my first poet, so this is kind of an interesting
Super.
genre, I suppose.
Well, I certainly think your strategy is a good one. Like, why wouldn't you have an endless curiosity about the world around you? Sure, go for it, like I certainly think the world's an endlessly interesting place. And also, like, there's no rules. You can do whatever you want on your on your podcast. No one's gonna stop you or whatever.
Oh, totally. Well, and it's interesting, like just following your curiosity, which sounds like that's what you do too. It's like you follow your curiosity, and you're surprised to find that some people are on that journey with you.
Yeah, I think the internet has been really good for me in that regard. I think people who put down the internet, they're just doing it wrong. Like,
Hmm.
I sort of muted certain words I didn't want to see. And
Yeah.
then beyond that point, I've made all sorts of real life friendships and met people who have the same sort of fringe interests so maybe you end up feeling a bit less alone or whatever. It's been great. Sure.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So your book, Permanent Smoke, is such a lovely read. I'm a bit of a lyricist myself, and so I was thinking, I'm like, um, what would I want someone to do if they were looking at my lyrics? And I thought,
Hmm.
man, there's just some lines that stick out to me, and I just wanted to talk about those, and then give you opportunity to read a couple of your pieces.
Okay, great.
So, I guess first of all, so your like Permanent Smoke is inspired by where you live, right?
Yeah. How do I give a short answer to this? Um, and make it interesting. Oh man. Um, but yeah, uh, when my first book came out, my first book had a lot of sort of autobiographical bits and pieces in it because that makes sense. When you start writing, you use the failures of your own romantic adventures in your life as raw material. And then when I had a chance for a second book, one thing I knew for sure was I did not want to do that ever again.
Hmm.
And I didn't want to talk about myself or my feelings, but I wanted to make sure that every page sort of was densely packed and pushed my imagination and talked about something besides just dear diary, she broke my heart, whatever.
Yeah.
So then when I was looking for a big theme, first off, it seemed like the way your physical environment affects your mental landscape seemed like a pretty good theme.
Hmm.
And it just so happened that I live in a very interesting neighborhood where a lot of interesting things are going on here that are also happening in other places.
Hmm.
So I just thought that was a real kind of skeleton key for me. Stephen King has written 50 novels set in Maine because he lives in Maine.
Hmm.
And, Faulkner had those 2 dozen novels that took place in this fictional county with that name I can't pronounce. So the cliche in good writing that Anton Chekhov was a pioneer of was that the more specific you get, the more universal you get. Where
Ooh,
when you read
I
Anton
like that.
Chekhov, you start to cry, not because you too are a cobbler in Siberia, but because the guy is is processing a dream that didn't come true, a frustrated desire, the sensation of moving inexorably forward on the river of time, watching time have its way with you and take you apart, these things that are universal. So, like the back half of Permanent Smoke, where each poem takes place at an intersection on Barton Street, that was kind of me really doing my Anton Chekhov routine, where uh, by really digging deep into the few hundred meters surrounding my house, um, I've been told that, you know, I touched on themes that resonate with other places.
Hmm.
Like, for example, um, just 200 meters north of here is Barden Street and Emerald, and the Barden and Emerald poem is on the back of the book because it's kind of a skeleton key for the project. And just about a block from there on Victoria is where the Studebaker factory was,
Right.
where it used to be. They made Studebaker cars there. So a man could have a job that paid enough to have a wife who didn't have a job, kids, house, boat, cottage, and walk to work.
Yeah.
And then in 1963, when Studebaker shut down there, that was sort of when the suburbanization of North America happened. And they said, you don't want to live downtown. You want to spend your weekend cutting the grass and spend 20 hours a week commuting. And that's
Yeah.
when our neighborhoods and our communities really got destroyed. So for me, like Studebaker shutting down right there in 1963 is sort of like a metonym for the whole problem that we face now, where back then people watched the Jetsons, where it's like the future would be like you have a maid, but she's a robot. You have a car that but it can fly, and now this far on, we can see that whatever the cover story for the science fiction promises of the 20th century were, the end result of the technology was just to estrange us from our neighbors.
Hmm.
And like
Wow.
that's it, right? Like
Yeah.
the Jetsons lied to us, right?
Hmm.
We didn't get the best of that, we got the worst of it, right? And it's like, they say love your neighbor, right? Well, it's like, how can you do that if your neighbor never goes outside?
Yeah.
And due to
Yeah.
certain science fiction promise, some science fiction that became science fact, your neighbor uh, no longer goes outdoors,
Right.
right?
Well,
Because
especially
the
after the
screen,
pandemic, right? Like I think like I know I've shut down in a lot of ways, It's hard to get out. Like it's hard to go out and see people. Like it's like I just kind of have my life and I built my social life online, right?
yeah, and that's kind of the big problem we have now. Like, what do you do when the virtual flickering uh, reality becomes more persuasive and more seductive than the real thing?
Hmm.
You know, that's a big problem. You know, so yeah, that was the project for the book, and then what happened with Permanent Smoke was part of the reason why it's so awesome is because it's two books in one, where I had this idea to write a book about Barton Street, which is the longest street in town. Um, and then I started doing it, and then it began to, I was doing research on it. And then I said, research? This is feeling like a job. I already have a job, right? Also, that section of the book didn't have any humor. And I thought, why would I write a book that didn't have humor in it? That made no sense. So I put it on the shelf for a long time, like years, and then just started writing other stuff, which is more towards the front of the book. And then suddenly one day I just thought to myself, what if I just took the best bits from both projects and put them together?
Huh.
So in the book, you have the surrealist jokes part, which I like, and then the Barton Street part, and then the short story at the end. And now I'm finding out after the fact that different readers have, you know, different favorite sections, and it's been pretty fun.
That's
So
great.
so that was the idea. Like it's always about how to balance, like obviously to write a book because the rewards are so few,
Yeah.
you have to be fueled by an obsession to keep going.
Yeah.
And then you start to wonder, like, am I leaving everyone behind here? Is anyone actually following me down this trail?
Yeah.
Um, which is why humor is a big thing in my
Yeah.
books. Um, because you know, like anyone can write a sad poem, like your dog died, so what, right?
Yeah.
But but a joke also requires like a lot more craft built in, and you know, structure and stuff. So that's the parts I like. But also, um, I did a poetry reading in Dunkirk, New York, which is just before Erie, Pennsylvania, where the Rust Belt begins. And then I was reading stuff about when I worked at DeFasco in Hamilton, the steel mill. And then there were people in the audience who were talking about what happened in Syracuse when Bethlehem Steel shut down there. So it was just really inspiring for me to see about how the transformational power of art, where imagine meeting a stranger and instead of making small talk about sports ball or whatever, you're automatically talking to them about the most important things in their lives
Wow.
through the more rarefied language of poetry.
Damn. I keep saying this, art will save us. Like we've got so much division in our world, and there's so many things, there's so many ways to not understand each other. And I feel like art begins to bridge that gap between us.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Um, it's a reminder of the things that don't change, things we all have in common, right?
Well, it's complete magic too, because like when you were talking about like when we get down to the specifics, about our own experience, you'd think that it would cause us to disconnect because it's like, oh, you're wrapped up in yourself. But it's like, and I remember recently hearing a podcast where they were talking about how when we get into the specifics, it then becomes universal because it's that human connection. And it's like, that's so counterintuitive. Like so much of art is counterintuitive.
Well, I mean, um, when I when I lead like writers' workshops at libraries, and a writer says he's struggling, one thing I would say to him, I say to him, "Tell me something I don't know,"
Hmm.
right? And I love
Mhm.
hearing and I love reading stuff where someone tells me something I don't know, right?
Yeah, for
And like
sure.
and like I'm a big fan of Joseph Conrad, and he would always be juggling the metaphysical, abstract uh, portions with real nuts and bolts stuff about men tying knots with their hands and different
Hmm.
kinds of knots and sails and things like that. And then, the great writer Jack London, one of the best stories ever is called To Build a Fire, where it's literally about a guy trying to start a fire in northern Canada so he doesn't freeze to death. And you don't have to be a mountain man to be hooked on it. And it's just all these like, laying down these details where it should be inside baseball, but it's not because something is on the line, right?
Hmm.
Like also, besides the thing about the details and getting specific, uh, art is about desire. So when you have a story or a poem or a song, um, the sooner you can front load the desire to the front, the sooner you can hook the audience.
Huh.
Like
Yeah.
the writer David Mamet who wrote Glengarry Glen Ross. He said every story has to answer two questions: what does he want and why now?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the two follow-up questions are: what are the obstacles in his way, and what happens if he doesn't get it?
Hmm.
Okay. And there's so much bad, like what a bad poem is.
Yeah.
A bad poem is a poem with no sense data in it, where the narrator could be a brain in a jar, with no idea that they have a body, where it's just impressions and images, and there's nothing on the line.
Hmm.
Like uh, conflict is desire, frustrated, and that is story. So that's another thing you want to lock into as soon as possible.
Hmm. Okay. I'm gonna get to a line here. Um,
Yeah.
so from Breeze, corner of Barton and Emerald, taste and see, the heart of the world mends by breaking. I'm an Enneagram 4, and I just love that.
Okay.
And so when you talk about
Well,
like, are you kind of alluding to like that the world needs heartbreak to change? Is that what you would be alluding to in that?
Not to my knowledge.
I love that. Not to my knowledge. Yes, that's beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. Basically, let's put it this way. Um, uh, love, um, love involves risk.
Hmm.
Okay. So if you choose to love someone and say till death do us part and all that stuff, you say that even though you know it's possible,
Yeah.
that that person might die or get cancer or get fat or age or not operate the way you want her to.
Yeah.
You're taking all this risk on, and yet you do it, right? That's pretty wild,
Hmm.
right? And now we live in a society where um, there is a digital substitute for love that is seducing tens of millions of young men. And a lot of young gentlemen are looking at it going, well, it's not great, but it is less risky.
Yeah. Yeah.
So instead of taking the risk of the real deal, they're opting for this um, uh, substitute where the appeal is obvious. It's less risky, but long term, it leads to sort of, it's very dysgenic and bad, right? So the idea there is just that basically in these poems about Barton Street, there are these people there that the narrator is trying to connect with on the bus as they pass by or whatever, and it's taking a risk, right?
Hmm.
It's easier just to put on your headphones and your goggles and just pretend that they're all not there. But the idea is that to fix the world or fix whatever you want to fix, that would be an act of uh, risk, bravery, imagination, all these
Hmm.
things, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard. So people are always tempted just to take the easy way out there.
Wow. See another example of where art will heal us, right? Because it's like we have
Yeah.
to actually see the beauty in that risk. Okay.
Yeah. Um, that's a big thing about, I think part of what the book is about, and I hope this it kind of taps on it obliquely, is like, what do you value, right? Like it's obvious if you go to a mall or surf the net, there are dark forces at work that want you to focus your attention on X,
Right.
right? But it's healthy for you to stop and say, wait, am I focusing my attention on X because I want to or because I've been trained to,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
So looking at good art that I'm trying to, that I'm aspiring to make at least, is sort of a part of is trying to nudge you in the direction of reclaiming your mental landscape that has been colonized by
Right.
bad actors.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So from Like a Ninja, by the way, I love that title, Like a
Yeah.
Ninja. That's when all the magic tiptoed out the back door and I started sleeping in on Sundays. I that sounds like deconstruction to me. Um, did you come from a faith background?
Um, Sort of. I might not want to talk about that too much.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, yeah. I'm and um,
At least the speaker is saying that, right? It's like the magic tiptoed out the back door, so it's like kind of a loss of belief for the speaker.
yeah, I guess so. One thing I'm kind of alarmed about is how obviously in our society, um, one thing I can say, there was a philosopher I liked a lot back in the day named Jacques Ellul, Ellul, and he sort of talked about how obviously, like in our modern age, we have a real hard on for technology and expertise. The more expertise you have, the more you get paid per hour and all this stuff. And it's such a pervasive cult, we don't realize it's a cult, right? Where
Hmm.
um, uh, um, the way we're in love with our tech, it sort of reduces, it runs the risk of reducing people to things.
Yeah.
Like, if we're really all about, I'm an expert, listen to me, I have this technology. Um, it's like, what can you do for me? How can, and every human interaction becomes like a transaction. Um,
Yeah.
so that was so also, with a society that is so in love with tech, um, it leaves little room for what I call ontologic wonder, where basically for 2,000 years, Aristotle was the king of philosophers, and he said the metaphysics is the queen of the sciences.
Hmm.
And in 2023, nobody believes that, and they just say, "LOL." Uh, that's not provable either way, so what's the point, right?
Hmm.
But uh, metaphysics are questions like, um, why do you assume tomorrow will be like today? What is time? What is being? What are all these things that um, can't be tested via the scientific method? And back in Aristotle's day, people would look at an object and say, wow, here's a rock. Why is there something instead of nothing? Right?
Hmm.
And Plato said philosophy begins in wonder. And in 2023, anyone in the philosophy department says, LOL, that's stupid. That's a stupid question. Just get on with making money, becoming an expert,
Yeah.
you know, and like shopping, acquiring. Um, but one thing that that poem was kind of touching on was that the guy in the poem, he's looking for ontologic wonder, and he's kind of let down, where it's kind of like when you see the Wizard of Oz and you see the guy behind the curtain. That's kind of what I was thinking. And one thing that I want my books to do, and what I want from art, is to provoke ontologic wonder in the reader, where if you go and let's say you see a flower or a poem and you marvel at it for a second, that's some time where you are focusing your mental faculties on something that does not benefit the economy and doesn't boost the GDP, and yet somehow it's still important. So it's kind of funny how we live in a culture now where just if you start reactivating your ontologic wonder, that could be like an incendiary political act,
Hmm.
where certainly the narrator of that poem, that's what he's looking for. Um, I guess he goes to that church looking for magic, and
Right.
then is let down when he doesn't find it there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But certainly, I would encourage anyone listening to this to go write a poem. Just go for a walk, make a list of things you see, things that bother you, pay attention, and just pay attention to your surroundings more, because at the very least, it will make your day more interesting.
It's mindfulness, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but also, you know how they say nature abhors a vacuum, where if you don't think about this stuff, um, your mental landscape will just be colonized by by default, pretty much,
Right.
by economic drivers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love my work, like the work I get paid to do, because I
Hmm.
know that like it's health related, and so it provides meaning to me. And so I'm
That's
thankful
cool.
for that, because it's not just an economic driver. I'm gonna try to keep people healthy, right? And so and I think a lot of people don't have that, but I think, they're able to, I think, use, their occupation as a way to upkeep or to have a certain kind of lifestyle where they can find meaning outside of work. I guess we
Yeah.
all have different drivers that way.
Yeah. I guess I have a bit of a different take on that, where
Uh-huh.
I'm a big fan of living small. I like
Yes, I
small.
like that.
And uh, I really believe that. um, it's a good idea if you imagine that your world, what if your world fizzled out, 3 meters from your nose, right? Because it kind of does. Like, the walls of your room, the sound of the mailbox clunking, that's real. But anything
Yeah.
outside of that,
Yeah.
that's pretty much fantasy. And the funny thing
Hmm.
is, if you had a time machine and you asked your great grandfather, what is your hot take on Ukraine or your hot take on Yemen or Syria, he would think that you are literally insane. Okay.
Hmm. Yeah.
He would say to you, "You're insane. I'm busy. I have a full life taking care of my family."
Right.
Okay.
Hmm.
Also, you're insane. I live on the other side of the planet. Why on earth would you think I have an opinion on that? Right.
Wow.
Okay.
That's huge. Like I think I remember I listened to a podcast a while back and it was like this Christian punk artist who like would play shows at churches, I guess. And
Okay.
it came out that he was smoking marijuana. And so there were a bunch of people that had opinions on him smoking
Right,
marijuana.
right, right.
And he was like saying, yeah, they say everyone has a right to an opinion. He's like, I don't think people should. And I've
Okay.
been thinking about that ever since. I'm like, we're always like telling people they have a right to an opinion, but it's like, why
Well,
form an opinion on Ukraine? Like, why do I need to do
right,
that?
right, right. Okay. Well, there's two roads I want to take your comment down because
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
actually something that I feel very strongly about, very
Okay.
strongly. Okay. First off, if you were insane, you'd like to know it. Okay. But if everyone else around you is insane, your pathology becomes invisible by becoming, as soon as your pathology becomes ubiquitous, it becomes invisible.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
So the big question, what if you're insane? Okay. Now we live in a world because of your phone or whatever, you can act like you're an expert on Syria,
Yeah.
right? On the other side of the planet, you've never been there, you don't know any Syrian, you don't speak the language, but
Yeah.
your smartphone is encouraging you to think you're an expert,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's total fantasy, right? It's totally ridiculous,
It is.
right?
Yeah.
And it's like I think you should act as if what's real is within 3 meters of you because I think it's true,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you'd like to live in reality, right?
Yeah.
Um, uh, so I don't think you should have an opinion on the other side of the planet. Um, and this isn't a political view. I just think it's a fact. Like I don't think you should because I literally don't think you can. Okay.
Right. Right.
Um, yeah. Also, a funny thing is, current events. Do you remember that exciting, important issue everyone was talking about 6 months ago? No, you don't, right? But every day you wake up and there's some new shocker
Yeah.
that, right? So basically, and you watch it. Why? Because you think, oh, I have a duty to be informed. No, you
Hmm.
don't, right? What if,
Yeah.
okay, figure this. Here's a stranger who comes to you and he's agitated and he feels compelled to share his agitation with you, right? Okay. Who benefits here, right? Um, Nobody. Also, the important thing to remember, Marcus Aurelius was the emperor of the Roman Empire, and in the late first century, so around the 70s, not the 1970s, the 070s, and in one of the happiest ironies in the history of literature, Marcus Aurelius wrote a book that has blessed millions of people throughout 19 centuries. And he wrote this book with the intention that no one would ever read it. And he wrote this book just for himself
Hmm.
to try to train him to live a good life.
Yeah.
And he didn't want anyone else to see it. And it has blessed millions and millions of lives for 19 centuries. And in his book, The Meditations, Marcus Aurelius says, in any social interaction, always remember that you have a right not to have an opinion.
Wow. I love that. Um, okay. bribing the hangman. If my pin tweet gets 100 more likes, I can finish paying off the executioner's bribe. The internet was a mistake. I love this so much. I feel like we do kind of have like really a sense of high stakes with social media,
Yeah.
or can, anyways. Maybe not all of us do, but I think sometimes you can.
Yeah. Um, I guess what this is my fifth book.
Hmm.
One thing that was kind of interesting to me is I wrote all sorts of poems of different sizes and shapes, and then one day I wrote a poem that had 24 lines, and I looked at it, and for some reason the shape appealed to me, and I thought to myself, what if I wrote 1,000 poems that all had 24 lines? What if that would add up to some sort of point of view, right? So now when I'm writing a poem, sometimes I'll like that formal restriction I put on it really helps me know how close I am getting to the finish line or
Right.
whatever. And then I'll be thinking, what's a good ending? Because uh, poems have beginnings and endings, and poems have lines, and each line has a beginning and an ending. And Franz Kafka said, life has meaning because it ends. And if you lived forever, it couldn't be meaningful because if it just goes on and on, then there can't be any music.
Right.
So I was really interested in the structure of like beginnings, middles, and endings. So um, I like, so sort of what happens is I'll think of a good opening that I like, and then um, the rhythm and meter will start to kick in to help me link the ideas. And then I'll hopefully find an ending that is a surprise, but also feels like the right ending.
Right.
And that's kind of the big challenge. Uh, like you want like ideally when you write a poem or a song, each line has a surprise in it and has imagery that is fresh and startling and not just corny. But
Mm.
at the same time, you want it to have this flow with the inevitability of like the drunk guy in the bar spilling his life story out to you.
Yeah.
And then so in a poem like that, when I end it with that, again, hopefully it feels like the right ending, but also it sort of startles the reader and makes him think,
Yeah.
what? And then
Yeah.
hopefully he rereads it, which is when
Yeah.
it can really start to be haunting, right? And and you know, obviously when you read my book, you could guess that there are things that I'm alarmed about in our world, but I would never want to write directly about them because then I thought it would sound like a sermon or preaching, and
Yeah.
I don't think humans really learn from being lectured to in the same way as they do through art.
Hmm.
So um, I just don't think like memory works that way at all. So I just thought that if I just make these, so if I just sort of um, make this a string of like 1,000 poems that have 24 lines and say, here's a series of art objects, have at it. Then um, hopefully it tickles their sense of ontologic wonder, like I said, and hopefully they see in it the things that I was alarmed about without touching on it too directly.
Yeah.
And then if someone like you comes along and says, "Yeah, this draws my attention to this thing that I
Yeah.
also have some alarm about," then that's awesome. Yeah.
Okay. And then from Ottawa, we lost something when we went from bonfires to light bulbs. That's all my emoji was trying to say. That like whole idea of an emoji speaking so loud is incredible to me. I also, though, like this reminds me of, I don't know if you've read the book Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But when he talks about like the agricultural revolution being the great scam of mankind and how we went from like hunting gatherer society where we basically would gather whatever food we could for the day and that was it, that's as far as you thought into the future, like you'd move if there wasn't any food, And then when agriculture came along, it's like you had to plan years in advance. And for the first time, he argues, humanity experienced anxiety. And so when you talk about like bonfires to light bulbs, it's like we've gone through a lot of changes, as humanity. And there's really no going back. Like we've structured our society in such a way that it's just it wouldn't be sustainable without all the technology we have.
Well, we we might end up going back. It depends on how you think history works. If you think it's
Interesting.
progressive or if you think it's a circle.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's possible we might end up being like hunter gatherers in a few years. Like,
Huh.
there's more and more there's more and more cities where they don't have good drinking water. There's all sorts of places where things are breaking down, and so the funny thing about when people predict the future, like how they try to scare you with AI taking over or any sort of doomsday scenarios, they always seem kind of boring to me because they always assume that all their fantasies about the end of the world, they always presuppose an endless, reliable source of cheap electricity. And I don't know why anybody would make that assumption.
Hmm.
Like, you know, um, right now, um, it's cheaper to buy garlic from China than garlic that was grown 20 minutes down the road from me,
Yeah,
right?
that's crazy.
That's a fact, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I just look at that and say, well, how is that sustainable? Like, I don't think it is, right?
Hmm.
And I think it's quite possible that in the future we might be, um, you know, I don't know if the internet will exist in the future. I don't see any reason why I would assume it would, um, because all these fantasies require endless supplies of cheap electricity, which I don't think is, something I see in our future.
Yeah.
But I do think whatever future the human race has, it will involve people living in communities, which is how it was for most of human history, except for this little blip that you and I were born into.
It's a heck of a thing, hey, to like see us, see our timeline as a blip in history. It's
Yeah,
great
yeah.
perspective to have.
Well, it's a huge problem, and I think that's why you should read books written by dead people.
Hmm.
Because if you read people, because in general, reading a book is such a time suck. You have a much better chance of getting truth and wisdom and beauty from reading the dead, and not just have your current prejudices reinforced, right? Like,
Ooh. Yeah.
if you read a book by the dead, you also have this benefit of learning about how other people lived, and maybe you
Hmm.
think, oh wow, I thought this was normal. It's not normal, right?
Wow.
I think C.S. Lewis called that chronological snobbery, the idea that this generation is the apex of human development just because it coincidentally happens to have me in it,
Wow.
right?
Seems kind of
And
narcissistic.
like we think we're the best because what? We have Velcro and our great grandfathers didn't, right? You know?
I love that about like your Twitter feed. You're always posting like these old pictures, and it's just beautiful nostalgia, just random things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's a beautiful world, sure. And
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not sure what to say about that, but yeah,
It
um,
just is. It's interesting.
yeah.
Could
Well,
you
it is.
read? Sorry.
Oh, it was.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
it was actually an actual problem for a writer, where I remember growing up in the 1980s when
Yeah.
there was a certain when if you were like a young, reader, you read science fiction, and then I thought, oh wow, maybe someday I'll be a science fiction writer. And then
Yeah.
by the time I grew up, the whole world had turned into science fiction,
Oh
right?
wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of funny, like 200 years ago, Jonathan Swift, who wrote Gulliver's Travels, said, it is hard not to write satire. And what he meant is human nature is so wacky, just like lean into it, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
in 1980, J.G. Ballard, the great writer, said, everything is turning into science fiction,
Hmm.
right? Where, like I said, in the mid 20th century, science fiction meant, oh yeah, the Jetsons. Someday you'll have a maid, and the maid will be a robot. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, now I'm in the future and I can't afford dog food. I like, like I'm
Yeah.
worried about being
Yeah.
homeless. I don't have a maid at all,
Yeah.
right? But um, we do have this other science fiction thing that is causing, birth rates to like collapse, right?
Yeah.
And I was just reading about a woman in Montreal who got straight A's in school, had many degrees, and had a high-paying job, and she died because she walked on the metro tracks because she was distracted by her phone,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So in the science fiction promises of the 20th century, they said, yeah, we'll colonize Mars, it'll be awesome. But no one ever said, um, we'll be so distracted by our screens, we won't be able to cross the street without killing ourselves, right?
Wow. Yeah.
So now it's like, if I want to, so now the question is, a writer, how do you talk about 2023? You know, and it's kind of funny. Like, I think these my poems are a pretty good way to do that, where they're sort of like a burst of qualia, very much like refreshing your news feed. It's like a big, qualia dump, right?
Wow.
And I just say, this is where we're at.
Yeah. Okay. Could you read your piece, Hug the Panda, for me?
Yeah, sure. Oh man, yeah, it's right here actually.
Okay.
A neighbor in a giant panda costume, waving folks into the car wash, says, our lives are not our own. And suddenly I'm back in school, frantically waving my hand, in search of a secret as big as the world. Some nights at the bus stop, I do math in my head. Wonder if I should have said yes when I said no. Joined the army, changed my name, jumped when the big kids told me to. But now the treehouse is gone, and all those magical on-ramps recede until there's just me, the highway, and the horizon. What if I'd followed that one-legged pirate with his tales of buried treasure, instead of abasing myself over a bankrupt pension plan? Lost my magic beans in a Nigerian email scam. Still, I wonder what's on the other side of that cloud. And could I have beaten the giant, fought my way home to thunderous applause? School was just another store. They bought me and taught me the secret knowledge of fractions. And if the bus is late, I strike a dramatic pose, hoping some Hollywood urgency will compel wheels to spin faster. When it doesn't work, I wish I'd hugged the panda, asked him to tell me what he meant, but we just aren't that close.
It's that end line, hey? Just that end line that's just like it's a nice turn to it. We just aren't that close.
Well, it's really nice to know that you read the book and actually got something out of it. And like I said, that poem, it just started where I did see a guy at a car wash in a giant costume waving people in. And I thought that's worth writing down in the notebook, and saving for a rainy day.
Oh, it's just yeah, it's beautiful imagery. It's a trip. It's funny. Keith Giles, he told me you got to have Darrell on your podcast. He's a trip.
Well, I sure am grateful to Keith for all he's done for me. Like, he's a great guy, no doubt.
He's such a
Yeah,
great guy. He's
yeah.
he's got a lot of people. Like he's really helping a lot of people get their stuff out there, and it's amazing. Yeah.
Oh yeah, like Permanent Smoke is my first book with Keith, but the fifth book I've had published, and I could go on and on about the different ways in which he's a step up, but it's been great, sure.
It's good.
Yeah.
All right. I got Die Fledermaus. I don't know if I'm saying this right. Die
Yeah, yeah.
Fledermaus. Corner
Um,
of Barton and Gage. The bells are ringing. It's the season of Lent. This year I'm giving it all up. Giving up, period. Giving up on rage, revenge, the cigarette
Yeah.
burned couch, the blocks of row houses we could never make our ways across, our taxonomies of loss, all my ethereal embezzlements. Man, like giving up everything sounds amazing. I've
Yeah.
been like kind of ranting about like materialism and how, I feel like everything you owns you. I remember saying that to a guy at work and he's like, that you got that from Fight Club, right? And I'm like, I don't remember that being a line from Fight Club. I thought it was this big philosophical thing to say. But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but I do think like this idea that, like letting go of so many things so that we can, like you said, looking at things that are just right in front of us and being in the moment.
Well, yeah, like you reach a point in life where you sort of give your head a shake and say, what do I want? I thought I wanted this, but did I really want it, or was I just
Yeah.
programmed to want it?
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
yeah,
That may be
and
what my midlife crisis is all about. I thought I wanted this, you know?
yeah, um, and you can feel that pressure where, how on the one hand, you might say you want to be a good person, be generous, and all that stuff. But again, like I said, that takes work, and we're lazy, and it takes risk, and we're fearful. So what happens instead is like, let's say you see a neighbor who's struggling and wants help or something. Logically, rationally, you say to them, well, um, I also have fears about the future. So I'm going to work hard and achieve and acquire and get the American dream and then build a fence around my stuff. And after I've made myself secure, then I'll come and get back to you.
Yeah.
Then,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And then, of course, it just never happens.
No.
So it's a huge problem. And like I said, I don't think there's ever been a time in human history when our mental landscape was under such an assault
Hmm.
to be colonized by these bad actors. So it's certainly a good idea just to pay attention and, yeah, think about what you really want. Yeah.
And then, so Turbulence, the corner of Barton and Walter. The
Okay.
electromagnetic field rattles my bones. The high voltage, the hyperactive photons make it hard to think, easy to imagine redemption wafting on the wind, trying to land, getting tangled up in the wires. That's image of redemption being tangled up in the wires. I think again we're kind of looking at technology and its effect on us.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I wrote that on the bus on Barton Street, and right across. So imagine you're on a bus, and on the right-hand side, there's a Coca-Cola bottling plant there. And I
Hmm.
was trying to get a job there, but I could never get in there. And yeah, I guess I just spent a lot of time on the bus. And you've heard stories about about how living near transformer wires like that is the best thing for your health and all this stuff. But a lot of people don't have too many options in that regard.
Yeah.
So when you read that poem, for me, I just have this real visual picture in my head of it that I just had some affection for and wanted to document. Sure.
All right. Okay. Another one for you to read. Can you read Security?
Sure can. Just let me find it. This is really wild.
I
Like,
like that you have this stuff handy.
I almost have it handy. Yeah. Okay. And for those following at home, this is a poem that has uh, 12 lines, four stanzas of three, as opposed to most other poems in the book, which are all 24 lines long. And that is how you can tell this poem is older.
Okay.
Yeah. purity. Her naked hips remind me of planet Earth as seen from outer space. Don't ask me why. Inside the little purse she always carries is an address book. In that book, my name is written twice, once under D for Darrell, and once under E for Epp. Remembering this fact helps to calm me down, like knowing your gold is stored in a treasure chest sealed with 2 padlocks instead of just one.
I don't know what it is about this piece, but it's just so calming.
Yeah. Um, it's funny. I've had this experience now a few times where when I'm writing the stuff now, what interests me is seeing how I can push myself and my imagination and um, I guess you might say have a lot of fireworks in there to make sure that my book isn't like any other book, that
Mhm.
people really um, uh, get the impression that they are surprised, that it has a uniqueness to it. But then I'll have this experience of people saying to me that the simple love poem with the simple declarative statements, somehow in the middle of that kind of jumps out at them.
Huh.
So yeah, what can I say? Love, people like love poems. It's not going out of business or anything.
Yeah. All right. Man, I've got so many lines here. Um, from Ponnet, corner of Barton and St.
Yes.
Anne.
Yeah.
Obsolete constellations of pixel hum like bees, playing only Gilligan's Island's reruns. 7 unfunny castaways caught in the cathode ray glare through a million years of purgatory. Oh my gosh, like the whole purgatory thing. I'm like, I love the idea of syndication being purgatory. I'd imagine it's a hell for some of these actors actually to be typecasted after being syndicated. It's like this is who you are now for the rest of your life.
Well, it was hell for some of them.
Yeah.
Like, the cast of Gilligan's Island, they got totally screwed, where the syndication rules came into play after them. So every time Gilligan's Island was rerun, the original actors got paid nothing.
Wow.
So those guys got rocked, right? And uh, Leonard Nimoy, like he always said, being typecast is great. If it wasn't for Spock, I'd be lucky to be like the villain of the week on like Hawaii Five-O or something, right?
Huh.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, the cast of Gilligan's Island, they got really ripped off big time.
That's
Um,
so interesting because it's kind of similar to how, like, with music, when streaming came along, I think there's a lot of artists, well, maybe all artists got screwed over, right, with that. But it's like, if you're kind of at the forefront of something new, it's like you can't really change your business model to fit it, right?
well, it's funny. I remember when Spotify first came out, and then Peter Frampton, who had one of the biggest records of the decade of the '70s, he actually went on social media to talk about this, and he said Spotify sent Peter Frampton a royalty check for $70.
Huh.
And he's like, I'm Peter Frampton and I'm getting a royalty check for $70. How is some average kid gonna survive
Yeah.
now? It's horrible, right?
Yeah. Well, and I
But
mean, a lot of it is more exposure, right? And it's like, and then we hope that somehow more exposure is better instead of getting the money.
yeah, I wonder about that because like
Yeah.
I've heard that too, where people promise me exposure, and it's like the old joke where they say exposure is what an artist will die for, and also what an artist will die from.
Oh,
Meaning meaning an artist will die in a ditch frozen to death, right?
yeah.
Exposure, right?
Wow.
And it's kind of funny. Like I'm sort of at the point in my life where that's all sort of settled, where um, the amount of people who like one of my tweets about Planet of the Apes is not the same number of people who are actually going to buy the book, right? It just doesn't
Right.
work that way, right?
Right.
And basically, exposure already works if you're already as famous as Iron Man or a Kardashian or something. Otherwise, I don't know, like people can do what they want, but exposure, I don't know what to say about that. Yeah. But yeah, with that poem, I was kind of interested in the idea of obviously I've spent a lot of my life um, immersed in pop culture, and you might say wasted my life unless you can take that stuff and sculpt it into art and sort of redeem it. Like Marcel Proust, he had a book called which can be like his book can be translated as In Search of Lost Time, and then the end is called Time Regained, right? Where he's sort of taken his memories and redeeming his life by translating his memories into art, right? And the famous bit where like he has like a bite of a cake dipped in tea, and then suddenly triggers a memory to when he was 10, and he goes on this like 1 million word digression, and that's his way of saying, this is my life, these are my memories, this is the way of redeeming the time, right? So one thing I'm doing in my art is just sort of saying like, hey, um, I've spent my life awash in all this pop culture iconography. So have you. Let's just admit it. Let's examine it. Like turn the rock over, and just sort of play with it.
Yeah.
And you know, so sort of in my work, by taking these pop culture icons and sort of recontextualizing them, at the very least, it'll have some novelty value to encourage the reader to keep reading.
Yeah.
But also, I'm hoping it will startle the reader to make the reader see how strange the world actually is.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I know it's weird because like I even find, like the little bit of writing I do and the podcasting I do, it's like I'm not 100% sure why I'm doing all of this, but I feel like somehow it's making things better, right?
Oh,
And it's
sure.
like,
I'd certainly say so. And also, this is my personal take. I'm not a big fan of why questions. Like I think you should just work and then you die and then that's it. And I don't have much interest in saying like, oh, is this worth doing? Why am I doing this? Right?
yeah,
When I say like, and I really encourage anyone listening today, write a book. And if you say, well, it wouldn't be any good, I say that's not today's problem. Worry about that tomorrow. Just today, write a book,
yeah,
right? Because I
yeah,
think the worst thing you can do is just be a spectator in life. Like if you sit back and just watch season X of whatever everyone else is watching,
yeah,
your life will zip by a lot faster, which is scary. But also, like, um, don't ask, but let's do something, right? I don't even care what it is too much. Just do it,
yeah,
and don't ask why. Just do it because
yeah.
that's how you celebrate being alive. And don't be a spectator in your own life. Just do it.
Yeah, it's kind of do what you do. Like I think that's, and I mean, some people take up gardening and they'll do that all day. And it's like, and they do what they do. And that's awesome.
Yeah,
But yeah, I'm definitely gonna do some writing.
just
I'll
do it.
I'll get to work
Sure.
on some books once I get the time to do it.
Yeah. Well, um, start budgeting like 20 minutes a day, and then see
Oh yeah,
where
yeah.
you are in a year after doing 20 minutes a day.
That's good advice. All right. Diorama, corner of Barton and Gibson. Spray us with polyurethane. Give us a fresh coat of paint. Donate us to the National Museum, where we could provide a modicum of
Yeah.
pathos before the patrons rush off into the future. Put us somewhere between the Martian conquest and the least of the steam-powered trains. I like the Martian
Yeah.
conquest because I feel like that could go both ways, whether we conquered the Martians or the Martians conquered us.
Yeah. Let me see this poem. Yeah. Well, I guess that's one of the poems in the book where I sort of had this anger about how uh, there are these forces at work that are paving things over and destroying our past and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I guess when I started writing, I would just walk around Ward 3 in Hamilton and I would see all these people, and I would just sort of had this curiosity about their inner lives and these stories they had that they didn't have anyone to tell them to. So I just thought it was worth documenting. So, how the back half of the book, every poem is a certain intersection on Barton.
Yeah.
That's actually something I'm kind of evangelical about, where I say to people, picture an intersection that you've passed by a million times. And the next time you go there, if you just think to yourself, what happened on these latitude and longitude coordinates 5 years ago, 50 years ago, 500 years ago, at the very least, you'll have a more interesting day.
Mhm.
But once you start actually paying attention to the ligaments and rebar that your day is made out of, the world will just seem a lot more magical.
Hmm.
Uh, so yeah, in that poem, I guess there was some anger about the way that you know old people are replaced with new, just because it's new.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny, like thinking about legacy, right? Like I've really gotten away from that. Like, a lot of people want to build something that lasts. And I'm like,
Yeah.
and I think there's like a certain amount of pressure that's brought upon us. Like I think it was Conan O'Brien who went to like the grave of a former president. I don't know if it was a big name. Like it wasn't a big name. Like it was Coolidge or someone like that. And he
Okay.
looked at it and he's like, "Man, like this is a president we all kind of forgot about." And someone said to him, Conan, when your show's over, no one's going to watch it anymore. And he's like, that's actually a relief to me because I always feel like what I'm doing is so important because everyone's watching it. But it's like eventually I'll be forgotten. And that takes a lot of pressure off. And I've thought about that a lot where I'm just like, being forgotten doesn't seem so bad.
Yeah. Well, on the one hand, like if you talk about legacy, I guess um, I just think children is your legacy, right?
Yeah.
But your life has different chapters, and people spend the first half of their life running around trying to be a big shot, and
Yeah.
then when you're Conan O'Brien's age, you're in a different chapter, so you have this different perspective on it, and it's kind of funny. I can say that you know I spent a fair bit of time on Earth wishing I was a big shot and being
Yeah.
mortified with shame that I wasn't, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm all past that, and I'm just really uh, grateful and happy. And a lot of these, when I hear people talk about that, I can't even really relate to it very much. But it's kind of funny, like I would say to people, if you want to be a creative person, you have to fight really hard to keep your sense of humor.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you're really screwed. And once in a while, I'll meet someone who's, not young, and they're thin-skinned, touchy, bitchy, and I'll think to myself, I know what happened. Your mom told you were special.
Huh.
You wrote something that you thought was awesome. You
Yeah.
made your masterpiece, and the world just kept on turning. And now that's my problem, right? And I just think like whatever your lot is, you should be able to just to like, you know, lean into the good part of it, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, like I guess I'm kind of curious about the legacy thing, but I think the future is getting harder and harder to predict anyhow, right? Like
It is. Like I guess we don't really know what we're leaving behind, right? Like it's like I do have three children, right? And so it's like I instill in them what I can, but I want them to be whatever they're, born to be.
yeah,
Whatever amount of me that's in that, I don't know. But it's like I just want them to be who they are. And if that erases me, so be it. Like whatever they need to be.
yeah. Also, personally, I might file this under questions that I don't think it's a good idea to ask. Because, like, for
Mhm.
example, like, um, say for example, Rembrandt van Rijn, who was the top of his field ever, if you would went to him on a workday and said, why, what is your legacy? What is the ultimate jibber jabber, right? He would have thrown you out and said, you're out of your mind. I'm busy working. Go away,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and like William Shakespeare would have done the same thing. Like he would have
Hmm.
said, I'm working for money. I'm busy. Go away, you know.
Yeah.
So so it's kind of funny. There are people who see someone win an Oscar and they think, oh, I want to be an actor. And like, no, when you say that, do you mean you want to perform Shakespeare in the Park for free
Yeah.
for donations?
Yeah.
No, you're saying you want to be adored, right? That's different,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, would you spend your life working in the park doing Shakespeare for the pigeons and never get an Oscar? Well, if not, then you don't want to really bet on that same long shot. But the irony is that the great artists didn't have these questions because they just worked and they died and that was it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of just treating art like a job, and
Yeah.
I mean in the sense of like just do it, right, and just
Yeah.
keep on doing it.
Yeah. It's what I do. It's like the bird that's chirping outside or my cat that's meowing behind me.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way
It's
of putting it for
they're
sure.
doing what
Yeah,
they do. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Okay. This is one of my favorite lines. Um, uh, from Stadium, corner of Barton and Leinster.
yep,
In, did I say that right? Leinster? Leinster?
sure. Uh,
Whatever. Um,
Linster, yeah,
Leinster. In hell,
okay,
gluttons can eat all they want. It's the line up to the bathroom that's killer.
yeah, and for the sports fans, that is the Hamilton Ticat Stadium. That's where the Hamilton
CFL,
Tiger
Canadian
Cats stay.
Football League for the win.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So for most of my life, that was called Iverwin Stadium, and then the joke was they called it Neverwin Stadium, and then they tore it down and put a new thing there, and they called it Tim Hortons Field. So now Iverwin Stadium is called Tim Hortons Field, and Tim Hortons is like taking over everything now. So
Mm.
so I remember there was a time I think last summer when Tim Hortons Field was like 1,000 meters that way, and 1,000 meters that way in Hamilton Harbor was the yacht owned by Ron Joyce's son.
And who's
So
Ron
like
Joyce?
he was the CEO of Tim Hortons, who made it a big deal,
Oh, okay.
and and then
After
his son.
Tim Hortons passed away, right?
Yeah, Tim Horton actually didn't really put Tim Hortons on the map. It was like Ron Joyce who really made it a huge behemoth.
Well, it's kind of like
And
that sounds kind of like the story of McDonald's, eh? Where that one dude.
Ray Kroc, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. Where their big innovation was making everything the same, like making like a formula where, you
Right.
know, it tastes the same no matter what location you're at around the world, which is kind of strange. But yeah, so
Yeah.
Tim Hortons is sort of omnipresent around here. Yeah. And then it's funny when they tore down Iverwin Stadium and put up Tim Hortons Field, the new stadium actually seats less people because since they built the first stadium, the width of the average Hamilton ass had grown wider. So they had to
Wow.
take that into account. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. But yeah, so I guess in that poem, I was just sort of talking about, you know, I guess, not just gluttony, but how we never get enough of that thing we think we want.
Yeah. Well, I love and the consequence, right? Like there's a consequence for that, which is it's a natural consequence to line up to the bathroom.
Yeah.
Um Born Again, Barton Street Burger King. I like this line really out of context, but raging over parking spaces I should have fought harder for.
For
I
sure. Yeah.
I just love how that puts it into perspective because I think that there are a lot of people who have that tendency where you're sitting there and just being like, oh, yesterday I could have had that parking spot. And it's like, that's such a weird way to be.
Well, I mean, on the one hand, uh, I could say that in my life, I've had a problem with anger,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
like many billions of other men have also had a problem with anger. So there's
Billions.
that. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So there is that. And then also, the reason that line jumps out at you, I think that's for a reason, in the sense when I was doing my writers' workshops, I would always say to people, tell me something that bugs you, right?
Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
I say, tell me something that bugs you, I don't mean Donald Trump because that's like saying you like chocolate. Like everyone says that. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
anything, right?
Yes.
That's so stupid. But I
Yeah.
mean, that conversation you had with that douchebag in
Yeah.
1999, and for some reason you're still thinking about it,
Yeah.
right? It's like
Yeah.
a toothache where you can't stop pushing your tongue up against it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, for better or for worse, that's where you have to go.
Yeah.
So in every page of your writing, you should be thinking to yourself, how can I pump some life into this page? Like,
Yeah.
so for example, um, olfactory memories in humans are particularly vivid. So you'd be
Right.
surprised by about how much life you can add to a page you're writing by putting in a stink or a smell,
Hmm.
which is something that I try to do in the book, where let the reader know that you're not a head in a jar, that you have five senses. So give me some sense data, which can be like a hook for the stranger to get in your world,
Hmm.
and let us know that you have glands, you know?
Yeah. Trying to get the stranger into your world. That's a really good way of looking
Oh
at art
yeah.
for sure.
Like, what happens when you start writing, you show something to your mom and she likes it because she likes everything you do because she's your
Yeah.
mom. That doesn't
Yeah.
mean anything. But then if you really have the arrogance to think a stranger should take his time
Yeah.
to enter in my world, like help the guy out, right?
Yeah.
Give him some hooks and a way in.
Beautiful. Okay.
And the
One
way to
more.
do that, yeah.
Sorry. One
Oh, go
more
ahead.
from the Hard Road Clint story. It started before I was born when dad named me Clint because he wanted a Hollywood cowboy for a son. I let him down. I cried easily. Chose baking with aunties over throwing around the old pigskin with uncles as they paraded their chest hair like peacock plumage and traded dumb blonde jokes. Man, like
Okay, that
I relate to all of this.
okay.
Masculinity is such a challenging thing because I think, like you grow up, in the 70s and 80s with kind of like this is the template for what masculinity is. And then I feel like it's like people have questioned a lot of that. And I think for good reason. Like a lot of it, it's like you can't fit that template. And realizing, like when you start raising the next generation, it's like, well, I want you to figure out what your masculinity is or what your femininity is rather than giving you a template.
Okay. Um, yeah. Um, I vaguely remember writing that story. Let me think. Yeah, it's kind of funny. That story, there's a bit towards the end where his car breaks down during a rainstorm, and he
Yeah.
just kind of abandons his car, and it's sort of this big moment where he runs off into a forest and leaves his car behind, leave everything behind, and sort of runs into the storm. And for me, that was the part that kind of interested me, and I kind of worked back from there. And uh, I mean, obviously, like there's a lot of autobiographical stuff in the story, um, and the bit where he, like imagine a guy who discovers that you know things are made out of atoms, and most of the atom is basically empty space. So things that feel solid are not actually solid, and our friend here has a hard time dealing with that. So, like he says in the story, he hits people because he's looking for something solid, right?
Hmm.
And violence is sort of the failure of communication. He has these things inside of him that he wants to express but doesn't have the words for. So it comes out in this violence in these other ways, right? So I like that story a lot because it was sort of like, I think it compressed a lot of meaning into a small space. Where when I wrote it, it's like 3 pages or something. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I can retire now. I've said it all in 3 pages, right? Where um, it actually did sort of distill a lot of my work history into the story and a lot
Huh.
of other stuff. And I like the ending a lot. Um, but yeah, so I sort of enjoyed that story. And yeah. Um, but like I said, I think I guess someone else could tell me if it all works. Like do you see what I mean? How the book has 3 sections, and that's how the
Yeah.
book ends. And um, I thought it was funny how the book ends with an exclamation point where the narrator says, "If I'm lucky, I just might make it to Gananoque." And I kind of remember thinking that to myself, if I end my book with that line, will people just think I'm a psycho? Um, and of course, most of the readers now, thanks to Keith, are in America where they don't even know how to pronounce Gananoque or know where it is, right? But at the very least, I thought it'd be kind of like a memorable note to go out on with this big sort of um, apocalypse of this guy, leaving his suitcase and his car behind and just running towards the sunlight creeping over the tree line and saying, "Yeah, this is great," you know.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah, this has been so much fun. Like I'm just like it's just fun to just go over lines and then see what comes up as we're talking.
Well, I have
So
to say, like,
mhm,
Keith lined up a few different podcasts for me, and they've all been awesome. But when I got your note saying you wanted to actually do this, um, I looked at your note and I'm like, he actually read the book, praise the Lord. And then I thought, wow, like this is like the ideal reader, where someone who actually, really got something out of it. And like, that's what, like that's what I do. Like right now I'm reading a book by Thomas Hardy,
okay.
and I have like 7 bookmarks in it so far of bits I want to not forget with my
Yeah.
memory, right? Um, and I was always a big believer in the fact that the mark of good writing is you want to reread it,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
where there are layers of meaning buried into it, So I'm certainly grateful to have you as a reader. That's great.
Well, thank you. And I'm grateful to have you as a guest. Um, so what are you working on now?
Yeah, yeah. Uh, Basically, uh, how some people write books about things, and I have this idea, like you can tell how uh, literary surrealism, people like, you might say Mallarmé or Eluard or Apollinaire, they were really inspiring for me, where they were really into the poem being a document of its own creation, and being just a joyful celebration of the act of creating, and therefore a celebration of being alive. So whenever I write a book, I like to not know what I'm doing. And I always think that if I'm writing a book and I know what it's about, or I know how it's going to go, why would I bother writing it when I could just think about it? And
Huh.
I'm also a big fan of the idea that if I'm surprised how a piece turns out, like, these poems you mentioned where you like the endings, right? I was always a big believer in that. If I'm surprised by how a piece turns out, there's a much better chance the reader is going to be surprised. So right now I'm working on a new book of poetry, and I think I'm 70% done, maybe.
Wow.
And um, you can tell in the book I'm concerned about how technology is making it harder for us to truly communicate with one another. So I decided to call the book Alien Phonics Primer. And
Wow.
it made sense at the time. So, yeah, basically, what happens is I'm really a fan of miniatures like Maupassant or Chekhov, and then piling them up, and then it paints a big worldview, as opposed to saying, "Here's the great American novel," you know. So at some point, I'm still trying to make poems that are 24 lines long, and soon I'll have about 75 of them, and then I'll print them and put them on the floor and try to put them in a certain order. And it seems like the key is to not know what I'm doing. That's really important, because then you can allow spontaneity to leak in and give the poem some energy. And when I print them all out and put them on the floor, you start shuffling them around. And somehow, every time you do that, some sort of narrative line starts to emerge that holds it all together.
Wow. It's
And
the
then,
creative process is so interesting because it's like you're basically trying to find something that's already there and you don't know what you're looking for. But it's got this kind of divinity to it, I think. Like it's like there's some kind of a pattern that's forming that was there all along and you're just discovering it.
yeah, and also it's just very much a celebration of being alive, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's say you let's say you write a book, and let's say for the sake of argument, it sucks. Okay,
Yeah.
you can still say, "Hey, guess what? I didn't spend my whole life on Earth as a spectacle. Watch, binging on
Yeah.
like Netflix. I
Yeah.
did something. Here it is. Look at it,
Yeah.
right?" And then if someone comes down the road, some armchair quarterback, and says your book sucks, you should have done this instead. You can laugh in their face
Yeah.
and say, doesn't matter. What matters is I did something.
That's awesome. I love that. Okay. So, how can my listeners get in contact with your work?
Well, I'm on Twitter a lot. My Twitter handle is my name,
Okay.
Darrellepp. And my book, Permanent Smoke, is on Amazon for Kindle or paperback. And I'm also on Facebook, which is my name. And if you want to reach out to me, that'd be great. Super. Yeah.
Sounds awesome.
Air Smudge.